I walked out of the church after doing our TV program that reaches mostly all the African countries. And what else did that reach? Asia. Anyway, I did a program. There was a little snake out there right at the front of the church door. I thought it was my daughter's snake that got loose from we have a little snake and a couple turtles and reptiles in our reptile room. Well, it wasn't. It was a pygmy rattler, and it bit me right on the thumb at least twice, maybe 3 times. I cut the critter's head off and threw him in a box and drove to the hospital like mad. And they said, "Yep, you got a rattlesnake bite." That little critter twisted his neck around and bit me 2 or 3 times so fast, I was stunned. I cut his head off, brought him to the hospital. I was getting sicker by the minute. They put me in the hospital, hooked me up to a whole bunch of tubes and stuff. It said it's going to take a couple hours to get the antidote ready, some kind of special, really expensive one they've got. But it took a while anyway. The thumb swelled up twice its normal size. The pain and tingling ran down my arm and chest into my thighs from my thumb. I've had 10 broken bones in my life, but the next 10 hours was more pain than I've had all the broken bones combined. I could not believe it. So much pain, you're nauseated. You want to throw up. I just, man. So this afternoon, I said, "Look, I feel much better. I'd like to go home." Doctor said, "Well, we'd like to keep you for a couple of days." I said, I feel fine. I got work to do. Still got some swelling. If you see the right arm here is swelling a little bigger than the other one. But I still got marks on from the hospital marking me how far the swelling has gone. Anyway, I had tubes poking all over me. 428 times they poked me. And I never exaggerate, do I? Okay. Poked me half the night. So anyway, how many kinds of rattlesnake are there? Well, let's see. Some people say 20, some say 30 to 60, some say 32, some say 45. It depends how you want to classify them.
Well, the only truly consistent way to classify them is cladistically. Since evolution is and always was summarily defined as descent with inherent modification, referring to genetic variance and reproductive populations over many generations, that means that every taxa that ever evolved was just a modified version of whatever its ancestors were, and it still belongs to every parent clade that their ancestors did, because of the logical rule that you can't grow out of your ancestry, which I know contradicts the favorite lie of the creationist science denier.
See, the Bible says clearly they will bring forth after their kind. That's all I've ever seen. I think that's all any farmer in the world has ever seen. How many have ever done any farming before? We got several here done for the farm. Okay. Do you know of any exceptions to the idea that corn produces corn and cows produce cows and dogs produce dogs? Now, you might get some screwball varieties like the Chihuahua or what, but it's still a dog, barely, but it is still in the dog kind, okay?
You could never have a dog giving birth to a non-dog because that would violate the natural laws of evolution. Phylogeny necessarily adheres to the law of monophyly.
Monophyly. Cladistics, a monophyletic group, or clade, is a group of organisms that consists of all the descendants of a common ancestor. Oh, so a clade is all the ones that came from a common ancestor. I would be willing to say probably all the dogs came from a dog.
Exactly. So would you also say that the common ancestor of all snakes was a snake? Like the first snake?
I keep telling you, evolutionists, the animals do not care how we classify them. They don't even know we're classifying them, nor do they care.
Are you suggesting that it doesn't matter how we classify them? Not even if you need to get antivenom? Because you should know that there's a huge difference between the neurotoxin of a coral snake, which is North America's only genus of elapid, and the hemotoxin of a rattlesnake, which is America's most common genus of viper. Elapids and vipers are different families of snakes. Elapidae includes cobras, mambas, kraits, and taipans, and the American coral snake. Vipers are an even more diverse group that are also found all over the world in every inhabited continent, except, curiously, for Australia. They don't have any vipers over there. A bunch of elapids, but no vipers, strangely. And even among vipers, you have to know which one got you, because every subgroup has its own distinction, as I'm sure you know. You had to take the body of the rattlesnake that bit you into the hospital so they could tell you which kind of antivenom you need, because every subgroup has its own distinction. The timber rattlesnake, for example, has both hemotoxin and neurotoxin. And there's not just one type. I mean, if you want to be really exotic and you want to keep an African bush viper, then the local hospital is just not going to have the type of antivenom you need. So it really does matter how we classify them. And there's one way to do that that isn't arbitrary, that is objectively verifiable.
Taxonomy. Carolus Linnaeus is famous for his work in taxonomy, the science of identifying, naming, and classifying organisms, plants, bacteria, etc. He was born in 1707. Linnaeus' thoughts on evolution are very different from the modern-day theories. He believed that species were immutable, means species can't change. Now, he was wrong about this. He would say if there are 30 different kinds of sparrows, then God made 30 different kinds of sparrows. He went overboard in that regard. God might have made 2 sparrows, and Noah might have had 2 sparrows on the ark, and they've now diversified to 30 varieties of sparrows, but they're still a sparrow.
Then by that same token, could one original form of snake have diversified into 30 or more different varieties of snakes? Since, as you say,
you get all bent out of shape over a new species. Think for a minute, would you? It's a snake.
So a snake is a snake, and a sparrow is a sparrow, and it doesn't matter what varieties there are. I read that there are 30 different genera of sparrows amounting to 138 different species. Can 2 original sparrows on Noah's Ark eventually diversify into 30 different varieties, each of several new species of sparrows?
Okay. Even though, it should be though, Linnaeus believed in immutability, he did believe that the creation of new species was possible, but that it is limited. This is from wikibooks.org. Now, they believe in evolution. Okay. So Carolus Linnaeus was one of the guys in the 1700s responsible for developing what we call today our classification system. He started organizing things in order with kingdom, phylum, class, order, family, genus, species.
The best way to understand this in context is to see it as Linnaeus did, as a branching tree pattern of one original ancestral group diverging into 2 or more daughter sets, and then those 2 becoming 4, and then 8 and 16, and so on, descendant sets, excepting for those that eventually go extinct. Linnaeus realized that the only way this makes sense is if new species come about naturally, which his contemporaries said was impossible because that's macroevolution. And no one knew how that would happen until a century or so later, when Darwin explained the origin of species by means of natural selection.
Creationists don't have any argument with natural selection. We thought of it first, okay?
Back then, creationists still insisted that speciation was impossible, but now they know better. Now they've changed their story.
Variations within species and even creation of new species is possible and has been observed. That is science and is no problem for Bible believers who say that God clearly said they will always bring forth after their kind.
But if there are new or different species, then by definition, at least according to the biological species concept, they don't interbreed to bring forth after their kind anymore. At most, they might be able to produce infertile hybrids that cannot reconnect divergent bloodlines. So the variance builds up between the separated sets as they continue to grow apart. And if they're a different genus, then they can't produce viable offspring at all anymore.
Now, where exactly is a kind compared to Carolus Linnaeus's classification system? I don't think it's the same spot in every instance, and it doesn't matter. See, God made the kinds before Carolus Linnaeus made his classification system. So I think the word kind is very descriptive. I think the 4 different varieties of elephants, African elephant, Asian elephant, a mammoth, and mastodon, are the same kind of animal, and a 5-year-old will tell you that.
Except that, one, there are many more varieties of proboscideans than you're aware of, including fossil forms that were more diverse, more different from each other, and different from what we have left today. And 2, there's only ever been one hybrid between African and Asian elephants, and it died within a couple of weeks, despite being in intensive care. So African and Asian elephants are definitely different species, actually different genus as well, and consequently cannot bring forth anymore, even if they were the same kind initially. So asking a 5-year-old probably isn't as good an idea as asking a geneticist. But even geneticists don't know what a kind is. And don't ask a creationist that either, because they won't give you a straight answer.
Probably the kind indicates somewhere around the family or genus level. Everything above that is speculation.
No, it's not. Getting back to snakes, the viper family and the elapid family are both determined morphologically and confirmed genetically, so that we know that we're dealing with real and genuine relationships. The thing is, the two families are linked together as well, the same way. They're both colubroids, which is a separate clade distinct from hidophidians like boas and pythons. And again, even at that level, it's not just character traits. Like all colubroids that have differ from hidophidians in that they have only one lung and one carotid artery. Derived synapomorphies resulting from a mutation in an ancient common ancestor. Comparative genomics also shows that they and pythons and boas are genetically related, or as you would say.
It's a snake.
Now, wouldn't that mean that snake is a kind? That all snakes are part of the same kind, the snake kind?
Still a snake, okay?
In reality, there's no such thing as a kind, and some of the make-believers already know that. But creationists are religious fundamentalists who like to pretend as if evolution involves a change in kinds, as if one individual animal changes into or gives birth to another fundamentally different kind of thing. Evolution is whole populations, not individuals, and it's supposed to be over many generations, not just one. And the new variant should be a slightly modified version of whatever its ancestors were. But creationists misrepresent evolution every way they can, such that they want to make it into one individual in one generation, producing something so different that it's not even related to its parents. And this preacher has used the examples of cornstalks growing hamsters or elephants giving birth to pine trees. That's how hard he's trying to misunderstand such a simple concept. Of course, evolution isn't anything like what he says it is. Even if it was whole populations over many generations, there's still nowhere in evolutionary history or theory where a change in kind is even allowed, much less promoted. In fact, it's prohibited by the natural laws of biodiversity and monophily. I have explained this to him directly and explicitly, repeatedly, but liar's gonna lie, even when they've been corrected over and over again, so that they know that they're wrong. When they know better, they'll still keep on telling you that evolution isn't what it is and that macroevolution isn't what it is either. Because since evolution is the one and only explanation of biodiversity, even creationists realize that they have to accept some degree of evolution up to a point, and then they need to make up an arbitrary line as to how much they will accept and no more. So they say they accept microevolution and reject macro, even though they don't know what either of those words mean. Macroevolution is variation within a single species, like the different breeds of dogs that can all interbreed with each other. Macroevolution is large-scale variation at or above the species level, like the different species of canids that can no longer interbreed, like the African painted dog or the South American bush dog or the Asian raccoon dog. They can't interbreed with other dogs. And they can't interbreed with foxes either. And of course, different breeds of or different species of foxes can't interbreed either, even though they're all canids. They're all what he would call the dog kind, even though they can't bring forth with others of the same kind anymore because they're now all different species in several different genera.
You get all bent out of shape over a new species. Think for a minute, would you? It's a snake. Still a snake, okay? They know what to look for in a mate. You don't have to tell them. Let them go.
But being a new species means that they're not looking to mate with any member of another species. Thus, speciation is the most important point of division in all of taxonomy. That's where the line in the sand has always been between micro and macroevolution, even in Darwin's day and before then, too. That's what his book on the origin of species was all about, how evolution crossed that line. Because, as it turns out, within any interfertile collective, the parent genome actually inhibits the emergence of novel traits. If you want to derive certain characteristics, you have to isolate one group away from the rest and keep them separate for several generations. That's artificial selection. The same thing happens in nature, where one original group is dispersed on different islands, maybe, or distinguished between northern and southern varieties, perhaps separated by a wasteland or a river or mountain range or whatever. And if they remain divided long enough, then each group continues to build up their own unique mutations that are eventually spread throughout their own little communities, but that are not shared with any of the isolated sister groups. Thus, they continue to grow apart phenotypically and genotypically until eventually They can't or won't interbreed at all anymore under normal circumstances, unless under, in captivity or under duress. Or they may only be able to produce infertile hybrids that cannot recombine the bloodlines, at which point the ancestral gene pool no longer has any effect on restricting new variants, and they'll just continue to diverge further and further apart indefinitely, creating a next level of division from species to genus to family and so on.
Think for a minute, would you? It's a snake. Still a snake.
So when this carnival barker of a fundamentalist preacher says that he accepts speciation, the evolution of new species, and beyond that, even to the evolution of a new genus or possibly family, he is unwittingly admitting that he accepts macroevolution, variation at or above the species level. He's just moving the goalposts as if he gets to redefine what macroevolution is and always was. I know these religious extremist science denialists don't care about scientific evidence. They only care about what the Bible says, or they say they do, until it becomes inconvenient. They like to pretend as if the family tree of all life is actually an orchard of lots of little trees that were all planted separately, so that the one original species that was specially created by God, meaning conjured out of nothing by magic, could then evolve into lots of different subsets, different species, genera, families, or whatever, that would all be descendants of the same kind. But they can't show where these kinds can be indicated in taxonomy. And after all, the Bible is pretty vague about the beast kind, for example. And I've seen creationists put some dinosaurs in the beast kind and some in the bird kind, or I should say, into one of the bird kinds, because birds are not all the same kind for some reason. You'd think they would be, but the Bible is confused about that. The Bible says there are different kinds of birds. Well, at the same time, the whole category of creeping things are apparently all the same kind, according to the Bible. In fact, there are only two kinds that the Bible describes clearly. Mankind, where the first man was created as a golem spell and the first woman was created as a transmutation, and the snake kind, where the implication is that the serpent was some sort of a lizard and that God cursed that lizard to lose its legs and become the first snake. Curses and blessings are magical enchantments differentiated by whether they have positive or negative effects. So when someone tells you to have a blessed day, they are literally telling you to have a magically enchanted day. So God used his magic to create the first snake. And the fable continues, explaining that God cursed that first snake and all of its descendants as well, to crawl on their bellies and eat dust from then on. That was their punishment for the original sin of that first snake. We're not talking about the devil here. Satan wasn't the one who was cursed to crawl on his belly all the rest of his days. In fact, the first time Satan appears in the Bible is in a story chronologically after this one, which notes that Satan is walking, like he and God never even had a falling out. No. In Genesis 3, the Bible is only talking about a snake. That's all it can be. Just like the old Vietnamese folktale about how the tiger got its stripes, such that all subsequent tigers inherited their stripes from that one in the story, this is the Semitic folktale of how the serpent lost its legs, such that every subset of snake descendants from that one would have no legs. Because it also says that God put enmity between the children of men, mankind, and the descendants of the serpent, the snake kind. That men would crush the head of the serpents and that serpents would strike men's heels. It's not just talking about one lineage of snake. The story implies that it's talking about all snakes, every variety thereof. It does not say that God created a bunch of different kinds of snakes, like it does about different kinds of birds. The story wouldn't even make sense if God had cursed only one lineage of snakes to be snakes, but that he had already created other snakes, like during the creation week, that were already cursed the same way, even though they did nothing wrong. How would that make the serpent cursed above all else, right? That makes no sense. No, Genesis 3 can only be interpreted as the origin myth of all snakes collectively. Boas, pythons, king snakes, blind snakes, stiletto snakes, cobras, rattlers, all of them. So, Mr. Hovind, is that your interpretation? Because no matter what variety of snake it is,
still a snake.
Don't let this be like the last debate we had, which technically never ended, where you dodged every question and just gave up. No, I expect an answer to this question, a clear and unambiguous yes or no, to guide a follow-up discussion, especially regarding the evolution of rattlesnakes in particular, since you brought it up.
Rattlesnake population in every state. Boy, Alabama's got a bunch. Let's see, 1 to 3 different species. Okay. I think it was a dusky pygmy rattlesnake that got me.
So, Mr. Hovind, do you believe what the Bible clearly says in Genesis 3 about how God created mankind and then after the fall, he created the snake kind?